Let us join together in prayer. We give thanks for the testimony of those who have gone before us that invites us to trust. Whatever the challenges may be, may we trust that the way of Jesus will lead us through and beyond, and that we will know joy in our communion with one another and with creation. Amen. 2 weeks ago, we went to the Interfaith Pride service at the Unitarian Universalist Church here in St. Petersburg. There were several speakers, leaders of various congregations in the St. Pete area. We heard about experiences of the church being unwelcoming to LGBTQIA+ people. We heard about the faith community excluding non-heterosexual cisgender people. We heard about a judging and punishing God. Then there was a pivot to how many congregations are now accepting of all people and welcoming of all. And that this was a departure from the earlier church experience of many, and some of you know about that. The week before, I heard Dr. Grace Ji-Sun Kim speak at the Carter G. Woodson African American History Museum, and she talked about her newest book, When God Became White, Dismantling Whiteness for a More Just Christianity. Again, Dr. Kim talks about a God of judgment, insisting on conformity to whiteness. These people talked about a God of punishment and judgment, a scary God, a God that uses fear to instill obedience. I did not grow up with that God. I do not know that God. I grew up in the United Church of Christ, and to me, the church and God were always about love. Being loving and kind, treating the world in a loving and kind way, helping others who needed help like Jesus did, no matter who they were. I grew up with a God of unconditional love for all people. At our church in Ephrata, Pennsylvania, where my father was the pastor, we had a doctor in the congregation. He was our family doctor, and he lived on a farm. And he used to have apples from his apple trees in a bowl on the table in the reception area of his office. And I loved going to the doctor because it meant we'd get an apple. The nurse in the office was the doctor's wife, and she was so kind and friendly, and my brother and I loved to go there, and we loved to go play with their kids on the farm. Much later, I learned that the doctor had divorced his wife, the mother of his children, and married his nurse, who was many years younger than he was. Now, in the 50s, this could have been scandalous, especially for a doctor in a small town in Pennsylvania, Dutch country. He could have been ostracized and vilified. But there was no indication of anything but acceptance in his UCC church community. Love is, well, love. Here's another example of the loving God I grew up with. When I was in elementary school, we lived in Silver Spring, Maryland, and my father was the conference minister of the Central Atlantic Conference, and we were members of Christ Congregational Church. Our church had a youth program on Wednesdays, after school and into the evening. You went to one class before dinner, then everyone had dinner together, and then you went to another class after dinner. There was drama class, youth choirs, confirmation, orchestra, Bible study, various things, for something like 75 young people every week. This was called expanded plan. One Wednesday, a friend and I went to the bathroom during our class for the evening, and while we were in the bathroom, we opened all the extra rolls of toilet paper and we thoroughly rolled the bathroom. Then we went back to class. We figured no one could possibly figure out who'd done it. The next Wednesday, during the class I was in, I was told to go to Mrs. Tate's office. Marion K. Tate was the staff person in charge of Christian education at our church. She was the head honcho for all the children and youth ministries. I remember her as being a really old lady with gray hair. And she wasn't married. She was probably in her 40s. Anyway, I went to her office in fear and trepidation. How did she know that I was involved in that toilet paper incident? What would she do to me? I was not used to getting in trouble, so I was petrified. I remember sitting down in a chair across the desk from her as she sat at her desk. I may have been shaking. I know I was shaking inside. Mrs. Tate looked at me with her kindly expression, the only expression I had ever seen from her, and she started a conversation. I'm wondering if you have some thoughts or suggestions about how we can make Expanded Plan more fun and interesting for the students. What can we do to make it better? How do you think we can improve the program? I was stunned. I don't think I had much to say that was constructive. And then I was free to return to my class. Looking back on it now, Mrs. Tate was amazing. She was stupendous. She was so sharp. And I'm sure she would have handled the situation the same way, even if I hadn't been the daughter of the conference minister, even if my mom wasn't a secretary in the conference office, and even if my mom wasn't the chairperson of the social action committee for the church. Mrs. Tate knew what she was doing. She was a marvel. She was a Christian. She was showing me the image of a loving God. Also, our associate pastor at Christ Congregational Church, the Reverend Len Ebel, had a beautiful, beautiful voice, and he was the cantor at the nearby synagogue for Friday night services and often Saturday morning services. So there was no problem with interfaith acceptance in the UCC church I grew up in. So I mean it when I say I grew up in a church of unconditional love and acceptance, not a church of punishment or obedience. Okay, before you think I grew up in La La Land, I'll tell you a bit more. At our church in Silver Spring, where my mother was head of the Social Action Committee, right outside Washington, D.C., we had members who were avidly protesting the Vietnam War and registering as conscientious objectors, as well as people who were at the upper levels in the military and working at the Pentagon. And they would have panel discussions and workshops involving all the different views. Some of you may know of Parker Palmer. He's now a Quaker educator and activist. He was a member of our UCC church in Silver Spring. And he was part of this, where we would talk about all these different issues, and there would be all these workshops and things. And the people did not agree, and there were many heated conversations. But everyone remained part of one congregation and one community. I can remember my parents discussing resolutions for the annual meeting of the Central Atlanta Conference and then the Minnesota Conference in the 70s and 80s about inclusive language for God. I mean, this was a very divisive issue. This was new territory for many church leaders, but they were committed to justice, so they endorsed what was seen as a drastic step. There were actions taken around the ordination of openly gay people into the ministry of the UCC. And you know that many people were hiding behind the argument, why ordain them? No church will ever call them. They just didn't want gay people to be pastors. There were resolutions in support of reproductive rights and the rights of people with varying abilities. And the UCC named the policies of the State of Israel as apartheid over a decade ago. There are so many areas in which the UCC has made a commitment of faith, and the conversations have often been heated and passionate. Yes, UCC predecessors ordained the first black minister in 1785. Yes, the UCC family ordained the first woman pastor in 1853. Yes, the UCC ordained the first openly gay pastor in 1972. And the UCC has been involved in many movements for justice and human rights. Yes, the UCC has manifested the radical gospel of Jesus Christ in many ways. Now, on this UCC anniversary, as we tout the faithfulness of the UCC, I'll ask, is the UCC perfect? No. The UCC has had to repudiate the doctrine of discovery. It's given back land to indigenous peoples. It has confessed complicity in the boarding school movement that sought to decimate indigenous cultures on this land. It has issued a formal apology to Hawaii. It has invested $17 million in 7 historically black colleges in 1976 to help make reparations for some of the harm that's been done by racism. These and many other examples show that the UCC does not always get it right. Many congregations don't embody the commitments of our national church. There is still plenty of sexism, racism, greed, homophobia, and ethnocentrism in the United Church of Christ. There's still much to be set right. The UCC is not and never has been perfect. Now, this morning we heard the story of Jesus calming the angry sea. In this story, we're told that Jesus and the disciples are in a boat crossing the Sea of Galilee, a big lake really. A storm blows in. The disciples are afraid for their lives. Jesus is asleep with his head on a cushion. Did you notice that little detail? His head on a pillow. Peaceful. The disciples wake Jesus up, panicking. We're going to die, don't you care? Can't you do something? Jesus calms the storm. And then we're told Jesus said to the disciples, "Why are you so frightened? Have you no faith?" To me, this reveals a key to the history and identity of the United Church of Christ: fear. Fear leads to a church functioning with conformity. Fear engenders obedience. Fear leads to tightly controlled beliefs and values, so you know who's in and who's out. Fear is used to maintain control. And in the UCC, I think we are not afraid. We are not afraid of what others will think. We are not afraid that if we do the right thing, people will leave the church. We're not afraid that if we do what's faithful, new people won't be attracted to our church. And we know we need their money and their membership, especially as mainline churches are shrinking. We are not afraid that our commitment to justice may lead to economic insecurity. We are not afraid that acting out of unconditional love will lead to divine punishment. We're not afraid to admit when we get it wrong and we try to pursue reconciliation. This is not a church based on fear. We don't worship a punitive, angry God. So, in the UCC, I think we're not afraid. And when we're told that Jesus asks, "Have you no faith?" Just before this story was the story of the mustard seed. Faith like a mustard seed, the smallest of seeds, which grows into a huge bush. Have you no faith? I think in the UCC we have faith. Maybe we have a lot of faith. Maybe we have just a little faith. But that's enough. All we need is some faith. A hint, a wisp, an inkling. That's enough to drive out the fear. In describing the UCC in 1975, only 18 years into its existence, Oliver Powell, a UCC leader, described the UCC. He said, "It's mind-blowing trying to think of a simple, sensible way to say what the United Church of Christ is." Okay, Claire? It's not a new problem. He goes on, "What a mix. A beautiful, heady, exasperating, hopeful mix. What's not in that mix? Fear." Someone asked for a sermon this summer about why Christians are so judgmental. Here's my answer: fear. They're afraid. Afraid of what will be taken away from them, or afraid of what they won't receive. And so they judge. And why do we see the rise in Christian nationalism, which bears no reflection of the gospel of Jesus Christ? Fear. Come to church for comfort, for friendship, for spiritual support during hard times, when times are not hard. Come to explore your beliefs. Come to listen for how you can make a difference. Come to revere the earth. Come to give thanks. Come to be part of an alternative reality. Come to connect with the divine, the sacred, with something beyond yourself, yet within you. Come for joy. And yes, come to subdue your fears, because here love holds sway, not fear. Amen.